aftermath, I talk a lot about the day after filing the return, is that we do see, because there is not a strong oversight regime of this uncredentialed preparer community, that we do see instances of return preparer fraud, where refunds are stolen, where returns are altered after the taxpayer has approved them so that the refund is larger and the money is deposited into the preparer's account. And that is a really horrible experience for a taxpayer and may deter them from filing in the future.
Absolutely, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later about initiatives that are in place to educate filers about scams and fraudulent activity. But that's a really important point. So for lower income families, especially, the cost of filing taxes can include anything from financial, administrative, or educational burdens. And so, Mina, I would like to turn to you, and if you could talk a little bit about Chime and how you think access to free or low-cost filing services can benefit low-income individuals and families.
Sure, but before I begin, I actually want to introduce my colleague Lola Odier, who leads our state and federal advocacy work. And so please feel free, if you have questions afterwards, to find one of us to talk. But thank you, Letty, for that question. So for those that don't know, Chime is a fintech company. We partner with 2 national banks to bring our products to consumers, who we also call members. And we're really founded on this premise that the economic realities that everyday Americans and working families face don't align with our traditional banking model, in that it requires a high deposit or high fees to be able to bank every day. And so for Chime, we do not rely on fees as a business model. We like to say that we're member obsessed, and you're going to hear this theme kind of come throughout as I'm talking today. And really, what does member obsession mean, and how does it actually show up in our products? And what we really think about is who are our members. And as Letty alluded to, our members are those that are making less than $100,000. They are trying to make ends meet. And so for us, it's important to understand what some of their challenges are, whether that is around accessing credit, being able to access liquidity, or building towards savings. And so some of these things that we've done is, for example, we have free checking, free high yield savings, we don't have overdraft. And so for us, we also thought about, if these members are coming to us to do their day-to-day finances, well, maybe it also makes sense for us to support them during tax time as well too. And so our belief is that for many Americans, you have already paid your taxes throughout the year, so why are you paying again to file your taxes? So we are offering free tax filing. And this was a pilot that we actually started last year, and because it was so successful, we decided to double down on it this year. And we saw that last year, when people had filed taxes through Chime, they received an average of $3,500. And again, for many working families, this is a huge amount. It's probably the single largest lump sum that they will receive all year. And so this is not only an opportunity to help people access those dollars that they deserve and should get a return on, but to build in a savings moment. So to move away from emergency savings opportunity and thinking about short-term liquidity to longer-term planning. And so this is what we're trying to offer to our members. So our tax initiative is suitable for multiple scenarios, whether you are a W-2 filer or, a self-employed person, or you started filing elsewhere, now you want to bring your filing to Chime, we support that. We also are able to provide refunds up to 6 days earlier. Again, for many working families, having access to those dollars a lot earlier so that they can do planning is critically important. And we also guarantee max refund, and we offer unlimited support for our members who may have challenges during tax filing. As Letty alluded to, this can be a trying time for folks. There's lots of confusion, lots of paperwork, you're unsure, maybe this is your first time doing it, so we really want to make sure that that member obsession also carries through in terms of member support.
Great, and I think sticking with sort of the focus on low-income individuals and families. Mayoshi, I know that you serve through AARP Foundation, Tax Aid, a lot of the same individuals, though maybe at the other end of the spectrum as far as the age demographic goes. So if you could speak to sort of how the unique population that you serve, removing some of the barriers that have been discussed by Nina and Nina, how it serves them and sort of promotes their overall financial well-being.
Sure. I do want to start by sharing a little bit about AARP Foundation Tax Aid Program. We are the largest free, right now, tax prep program in the country. We have, and it's volunteer-based, so we have 28,000 volunteers who are serving over 1 million taxpayers every year. We are located all across the country in communities, in 3,600 sites right now, within each community where we have low to moderate income older adults. So that is the community that we serve. And by being part of AARP is a brand. And we've become an institution in some of these communities. And so by being associated with the brand of AARP, we're trusted. And so that is something that's really important for older adults to know that this is something that we can rely on. Our volunteers are certified. They're IRS certified. They go through hours of training every year, making sure they understand what's new, what the rules are, what the new tax provisions are. They have to pass a test to be able to volunteer. And so that is something that it's important for us to convey to our older adults. They want to make sure that they know that they're, even though it's free, they're getting quality work, and not only quality work, but really we work with our older adults, with our older adult taxpayers who come in. I think what's key about our program is that because they're volunteers, they're wanting to do this because they want to do something to help others. And so there's this element of caring that's involved. And so having our program and being free for everyone, when they come in, we have volunteers who are repeat taxpayers coming in, and they can ask questions and learn more about them. And I give you one story that I think is really neat. We had an older adult, a taxpayer, who had been in a couple of years, had gotten her taxes filed, and she, in the conversation that she had with their tax counselor, she mentioned something that was news to them. They had always asked her whether she had a dependent, and she would always say no. But in their conversation, the tax counselor learned that this older adult had a granddaughter who was an adult, but she was disabled. And so by understanding that and having those conversations and knowing that this was a change in her circumstance, they were able to really look at her tax return and make some adjustments accordingly. And in this situation, it resulted in a $25,000 benefit to her, refund to her. They went back and amended older past returns. So I think some of the barriers that we're removing are any sort of concerns, we're creating comfort, we're creating a trusted environment that allows people to really trust us to give us a lot of personal information and being able to provide them a quality service.
I think that trust piece is so important. We were talking about this before we got started, and really having that trusted space and those trusted people to go to is incredibly important. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and we're going to talk about common misconceptions, of which there are many. So John, I'm going to turn to you. There are knowledge, myths, and misunderstandings about the tax filing process. So can you share what some of the most common of those are?
Sure. I'm sitting next to the president of common misconceptions in the tax filing process. I'm going to do my best for this. Before I say something, though, you all run an amazing program, incredible program. I think one of the things that I feel confident about with Chime is the customer is going to know what to expect from the process, right? And certainly that comes through to the AARP. And I think that's one of when I connect it back to where Nina started, there's a lot of places where you're doing taxes and you just don't know what you're going to get. Or you don't know what you're going to get until you're done. And that's a really challenging process. Or you might not know what it's going to cost until you're done. And I think that's really a difficult thing for people who want to engage with the tax system with confidence, with trust, so on and so forth. and it's one of the things that we've had to learn in a modern context too, about how you create that expression of confidence, upfront pricing, transparent pricing, and to your point, go back and look at all of your old returns, these sorts of things that establish trust. So it's a theme in those that I think is really important for eliminating barriers. And it connects to one of the myths that I wanted to talk about, which is like you shouldn't file if you don't have enough income. And this has been one of the most fascinating things, especially through and since COVID. The process to get connected to various government systems in order to be able to participate in a variety of ways is a common misconception. I don't make enough money, I don't need to file. It's one of the sort of more interesting experiences we've had over the last couple of years as people have dropped out of the filing pool to convince them to come back. And in our case, to convince them to come back and they might have to pay for it is a really interesting situation. So you've got to be able to express the benefits of that, and I think is really challenging. I think the other maybe misconception is that the process is time intensive. And in most cases, it's just not. That's part of expectation setting. I imagine Chime does that a lot. The process can take X number of minutes, so on and so forth. I suspect you have the same, like this, you can expect these things. Most of our processes are done 60 to 90 minutes. As long as you have to and then I think the other one, just not knowing where to start. You talked about it a little bit. Okay, I drive to the corner of 12th and Main Street in Kansas City, and there are 6 tax preparers within half a mile. What's good? What's bad? What do I need to prepare in order to begin the process? How do I feel confident? How do I feel not being embarrassed by this process, so on and so forth. And so I think that's in and of itself is an overwhelming process.
Did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Good. Okay. So I'm gonna stick with you, John, and get into the weeds just a little bit on just some of the tax credits, deductions that may fly under the radar and that people may not be aware of.
We have 2 hours to talk about this. No, we have 90 seconds. A couple that I might mention that I think are particularly important for us. A lot of missed opportunity around educational credits. So American Opportunity Tax Credit, Lifetime Learning Credit. These are very commonly missed. We often have to ask a couple of different ways to not miss them. I think something that our team has spent a lot of time on recently is another credit, retirement savers credit, which is an amazing piece of policy to help support low and middle income taxpayers and saving for retirement. But knowledge of this credit is functionally zero. And in order to really take advantage of it, you have to have both access to an account, you have to make a contribution to those accounts, of course you can do that tax time too. There's just a lot of things that have to come together in order to take advantage of what is a potentially very powerful benefit. And still a gap between the people who are eligible for UTC and CTC and those who don't. And that's just unfortunately a fact. And we're all working on that in some form or fashion, trying to make that not be true, given the power of these tax credits. I think the way we do it is a piece of work in our team called Second Look. It sounds like maybe what you all do. So for free, hand us your last 3 tax returns, and we will take a look at them through the process them through the transcripts. We'll take a look at things. We'll have a conversation. Interestingly, the biggest challenge was around the story that you said around dependence. That is an incredibly difficult concept, just like you said. It's the family, it's the household. Who decides that?
You mentioned the Savers Credit, which is set to transition to the Savers Match in January of 2027. And I think one of the biggest conversations that we've had around that, there's such incredible opportunity, but how do we make people aware that they're eligible for it? And so I commend all of you that are interacting, with people on a daily basis to educate them about these available credits that are so important. obviously, in the past years, technology's really changed the way that people file their taxes. So, Mina, you touched on a lot of this initially, but would just love to hear how the advancement of technology has made the filing process not only easier but more accessible to people.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I would say that, consumers are sophisticated in the sense that they will shop around and find the best option for them. And I love seeing that there are more and more free tax filing options, and technology is one of the ways in which we're able to bring that into market. I mean, it's in Chime's description. We are a fintech company, and so we're leaning into that. And whether that is, you can drive to your local tax aid or, file an H&R block, Chime is trying to offer this as a way to, again, meet our members where they're at. This is part of our really trying to understand our members' challenges and where they're at and being able to bring those services to bear. So for us, I think when we thought about the tax filing component of it, it felt like it was a natural extension for what Chime offers, in that we are already primary account providers for many of our members. They come to us for their checking savings needs, they direct deposit with us, and so why wouldn't we also help them with this really important moment during the year where we can, again, try to create some cushion around savings, helping them budget, helping them to achieve their long-term goals. And then I think that there's also quite a bit of research that's been done around how do you bring in behavioral insights and things like that, principles around financial well-being, again, to further demystify this tax filing process, right? And so one, I think all of this is already mentioned, the trust is really important. Whether it is you are going to a new person to file your taxes for the first time, making sure that their credentials, or coming back to a company again, or in our case, working with one of your primary financial services provider to be able to do this. And so it is the backbone of banking. It's also, I would say, the backbone of tax filing as well. The other things that we've also tried to bring in is pre-populating forms. It seems like a small thing, but I think anything to remove barriers for folks makes it a lot easier for them to want to come to the table on that. Chime does that. We've also seen some of this with the IRS as well through direct file. I'm sure H&R Block also does this as well, especially if you've already filed taxes with a provider previously. And then I think also it's breaking it down into simple steps, right? Like making sure that we help set expectations, making sure that it makes it easier for people to be able to take action. Like, hey, we already have information about XYZ, take a picture of your phone, upload whatever your W-2 is, and then we're able to take a step there. These are, again, all very well-researched things to make sure that people are able to take those small actions that helps them achieve a larger goal. And then as part of that, as part of that setting expectations, we want to let people know, hey, what is your expected refund at the state and federal level? When we also will provide tracking, when are you expected to get this refund back, so that we can again really help people try to start planning and try savings and try to develop a savings model around it. And I think the last piece for us is that because we are not a physical branch, or people can come to us, we understand that there is probably going to be some questions too, and so we want to offer a variety of ways for people to be able to get consumer support, to whether that is through chat or calling us on the phone. And we also don't want to limit that amount, right? We're trying to create a good feeling around tax time and really trying to dial in on this ease of filing taxes, and we also want to make sure that our members feel supported.
If I may insert here, I know that there's a lot of controversy about direct file. I've always been baffled why there would be. The IRS is one of the few countries in the world, and alone among developed countries, that does not have a direct filing option with its government. It's a fundamental, right of taxpayers to file their returns for free with the IRS. But what's been really interesting, what direct file and the IRS focusing on that has created, the IRS has had an online account for years that is incredibly underutilized by taxpayers. They don't go in and check, they don't know what they can do on that online account and what they can see. So in order to utilize direct file, you need to have an online account. And that has brought people in so that now through the online account, they can see notices, they can track the status of their returns. And what the IRS has said, which is something that I've recommended since I think 2004, which ages me, but never mind, is that, you know, the IRS should make the tax data that it has, for the W-2s, the 1099s, et cetera, available to wherever the taxpayer wants that data to be sent. So if the taxpayer wants that data to be sent to H&R Block, downloaded into their system, the taxpayer should have the ability to go into their account or authorize through H&R Block's app, you know, the permission for H&R Block to get those W-2s and download it instantaneously into their return. Same thing for time. And what Direct File has done is gotten the IRS to build that capability first for Direct File, but it said this year that it was going to make it available for next year for the other entities. And I think that's an incredible achievement. One, because it reduces burden. You know, you don't have to ask the person to take a picture of their W-2. It's there. That's incredibly important. One less burden step. But also it gets people into an online account, and that's where you can actually create more education, you know, problem solving, tracking, etc. It puts power in their own hands, and it may demystify a little bit the filing process and the relationship with the IRS.
And I think, you know, we all agree that technology is certainly really helpful in the, you know, the access piece and cutting down on time quite a bit. You know, we talked about the 6.5 billion hours. Hopefully we can cut that number down a little bit next year. But Mayanshi, I wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in here because I know that a lot of the people you work with are maybe not as technologically savvy. And so I don't know if your preparers sort of help them with that, or if you see a value in, you know, maintaining some of the more traditional methods of, you know, putting in an envelope and putting a stamp on it.
Sure, and I liked what you, Lena, and Lena, you guys described is the dream. And what I see us as being, we're helping to transition folks to that space. Our traditional method is in person. An older adult will bring their information to us. We will use the technology that's available to us to complete it, but it's really that's the traditional model. We have, since the pandemic, moved in that direction of where you all are. We've created different models where we call them coaching models, where we'll provide coaching online. We'll provide it in person. We'll encourage a taxpayer to use our software with us in person or on the phone. And so we found that we've had an uptick in that. A lot of our taxpayers who additionally have a traditional model of coming in, they're comfortable enough with their tax counselor that they're willing to try something new, and so they're moving in that direction. So what I like to say is that we're preparing them to be able to file their taxes through Direct File or work with your tools that you guys have provided. But right now we're in transition mode.
You know, it's a big undertaking, but, you know, really love all the work that you're doing. I wanted to circle back, John, if we could, we talked about the tax credits and deductions, and there's just a vast number of them. We talked about the importance of educating people on these available credits and deductions. So what are some initiatives, I know you touched on a couple of them, that H&R Block is involved in, but what are some initiatives out there to educate people?
I'm going to connect the first part of my answer to your previous question on technology. We're obviously talking about tax filing, right? But tax filing is just one part of the process. And if we think about, in some ways, the promise of technology could be pulling apart the tax code and all of the wonderful things that it can do for people if you know what to do. And that part is incredibly hard. How would a person become an expert in that part of the process? So one of the things I'm excited about for the power of technology is not just to automate the process of filing, but also the process of sort of using the tax code for your own personal benefit. And whether that is, you know, helping you make ends meet, or whether it's putting a foot in the ground and trying to achieve something else in your life. But like, if you don't know about things that are available at the federal and state level, you know, how are you internally that we're trying to do is recognize that people who are interacting with us, this is a personal moment, it's an emotional moment, it's not just a clinical thing. You may show up scared, you may show up excited, you may show up desperate, and you got to figure out a way to help the person in whatever context they're in, and still try to think of it as a moment to teach them something about the way this process can benefit them either short term or long term. We do that with simple takeaway, personalized things, generic comments about the credits within the individual circumstance the person is involved in. There's only so much one person can do in the process, or one firm can do in the process. So I think this sort of coalition of different kinds of capabilities represented in the front of the room, especially along with all of the other groups that are working directly with families, is the answer here. Shouldn't miss out though on what technology can do. That's the part that we're spending a bunch of time on trying to figure out. Okay, Savers Match might be a form that you file, but what are you going to do for the 2 years before that to prepare yourself for it? How are you going to get access to an account? How are you going to find ways to manufacture small amounts of money and do that every day? So it's not just once a year. That's how I'd start the conversation.
Nina, I promised we'd talk about scams and fraud. So here we are. You've shared some actually really interesting initiatives to help taxpayers avoid these, especially those that may not be quite as educated on the process.
So this filing season, we partnered with the DC Office of Tax and Revenue to do a mini campaign the month of February because we know that taxpayers, there are two filing peaks with the IRS. One is right as soon as the filing season opens, which is usually the end of January, the first 2 weeks of February, and then you get a peak now. All the procrastinators coming in. Not procrastinators, just waiting until the end of the filing season. And so for February, what we did was using DC data and then IRS statistics of income data, we identified about 5 zip codes in the District of Columbia where there was concentration of returns that had been adjusted by the district, the DC returns that had been adjusted by the district, so it had some kind of errors in them. But also that there were a large number of prepared returns. There were a large number of low-income taxpayers in that community based on census data. There were a large number of EITC returns and EITC returns by preparers. And we took all that data and we identified the metro stops that served that community, those zip codes. And we put up these huge posters for the month of February, and on 2 of the metro stops we actually had 16-foot banners, which was really neat. And we basically, the message said, well, I'll show you. I mean, some of the messages were something like, be smart at tax time. Watch out for return preparer fraud. Your identity could, or your refund or identity could be stolen. Protect yourself. Be smart. Choose your tax preparer wisely. It wasn't saying don't go to a preparer. It was just like, be a smart tax consumer. Think about these things. And then there was a QR code that led to a page on the DC website that just, talked about choosing your return preparer, stronger, more detailed than what we could do here. Some of the other messages were things just to remind taxpayers, and this is really important for the day after, that when someone prepares your return for a fee, they have to sign the return and give you a copy of that return. So that way you have the information about the preparer on the return, so you can show the IRS that someone did prepare it, and also that this is the return you got, and the one that the IRS got has been altered, and that's not your return, so that you don't have to be held liable for anything that the preparer has done the day after. And that's incredibly important and a very basic message. And so you can just see, what we're doing with DC is checking to see whether behavior has changed in those zip codes, but we're really planning for next year is to do a much larger campaign where in those zip codes we'll be doing mobile ads, and we'll also be doing some direct mail postcards using the post office, and they're linked to Census Bureau data so that we can target households that have the income with children that would make them possible candidates for some of the unscrupulous preparers that are out there that are just looking to maximize a refund unlawfully and then leave the taxpayer with the bill at the end of the day. The other thing I have to say is we're also doing mystery shopping this filing season. And that's in 6 locations around the United States, very different places. I can give one early report, which, and I think this is good, but I don't know. We've been having difficulty having the shoppers come in if they can't. We can't get beyond the initial screener if we don't have the birth certificate for the children. Now, people are reasonably concerned about giving their children's birth certificates out if you're deliberately going to preparers that you think are unscrupulous. So we're just going to report that we can't get, is that good? Well, it's good that that's sunk in, but we now can't get beyond to test what they're doing once they get these children in. So that's been an interesting shift from, say, 10 years ago. That message has gotten out.
I'd like to add something about that. One of the things that's really unique about our program in that it's with volunteers who are really committed to the taxpayer is that they, by looking at their taxes, they get a lot of information about what's going on in their lives. And so they have an opportunity to share some ideas and some thinking. They may notice that they're caring for, like the example I gave earlier, they're caring for a dependent, but they don't recognize that that's what they're doing. Or they may be more susceptible to fraud, and so it's evident in the paperwork. And so our counselors can take a moment to share with them, here's some things to look out for. They may be able to say, here's what you can do with your HR department and your W-4 to change what next year tax situation looks like for you. So it's the community connection that our counselors make, the way that they're connecting with all the taxpayers, gives them an opportunity to provide them with one-on-one advice, perhaps, and just sort of sharing of information that could be helpful for them depending on their situation.
Great. So I think we have time for one more question before we turn it to the audience for questions. And I would like each of you to address this. Really want to get some insight into the behavioral aspect. So there are both components to that. Some people, when they are anticipating a large return, they sort of see it as this big windfall. Oh, great, I have this sort of found money. So the first part of my question to each of you is, how does what people decide to do with that money impact their overall long-term financial health? And then what are some strategies, whether that be saving, paying down debt, investing, that you would recommend to taxpayers, especially those that may get a substantial refund? And we'll start with you, Nina.
I think all the panelists have kind of alluded to this. Tax time is one moment in the year for thinking about your finances, and so some of the things that we've done at Chime is to also integrate this with a financial education opportunity, and as such, Chime partners with Zogo, and we offer financial education to all of our Chime members. We're in the process of integrating this directly in app, as some of the things that I've been speaking to about trying to make things easier and ungating things and reducing the burden of being able to access. And so the financial education portion of it is meant to support Chime members to exactly answer these questions. I now receive my income, my tax refund. Should I pay down my debt? Should I be saving for college? Should I do something? So I think these are opportunities to help people understand what makes the most sense for them in their situation. The other thing, as I had alluded to, is because we are their primary account provider. Some of the other innovative things that Chime has brought to consumers in this, like helping to set expectations, helping to give consumers more information, is we have a spending insights hub as well as a bill paying hub. And so again, this is meant to help members look at their month-to-month expenses to understand what are the trends that they're seeing to better plan. The other things that we're opening up in terms of not just trying to help members with month-to-month expenses, but looking towards the longer term, is to build this idea around a savings envelope. Maybe many of you have had this where your mom had like an envelope where they were saving money for your school uniform or your next cell phone. And so this is the same concept that we're bringing, but now to your phone. And so maybe some of these tax dollars can go towards that. And then finally, the other thing is that really we want to help people double down on the savings component of it. And so one of the other things that we are offering to our Chime members is a high yield savings account. So now to take a portion of those tax dollars and then putting it in your savings and then watching that grow.
That reminds me that when I was running the low-income taxpayer clinic I founded in Richmond, Virginia in 1992, one of my clients had a grandmother who was the bank for the family, and she had sweaters that were hanging in her closet and jackets, and this pocket was the bank for this granddaughter, and this pocket was the bank, the account for this niece, et cetera. And each person would bring some cash every week to her, and she would be the person holding that cash for them. And we didn't want to share that too widely, which goes to my single observation, which is that over time a lot of people have tried to spend what I view as a wasted effort trying to educate taxpayers to lower their withholdings and not get a big refund. And I think that that's fighting what taxpayers view as a positive thing from the IRS. Their lives are so marginal, money in gets spent if they get it. So having your withholding or not getting the money monthly lets them be able, in the only way they can, create some kind of asset. And so the focus should be not on just reducing that refund at the end of the year, getting it during the year, but rather what you would do if you had some money and doing that financial education. And I think shifting in that direction both reflects what taxpayers do, which is smart. Why fight them on what they're telling you they want to do, and instead educate them better on what to do with it now that you're saving.
I'm of such mixed mind on that topic.
Yes.
Because in COVID we saw the benefit of paying people monthly, and we saw what that did to financial health. It improved in lots of different ways. Just to have access to those funds on a monthly basis instead of on an annual basis. Like that experiment showed in some ways what's possible with this, but it doesn't practically work in the tax code because so many of the large refunds come from refundable tax credits, which you couldn't access anyway in an advanced way, at least not in the way that I know of. I think there's a lot we could say here about this. I think the thing that contribute to this conversation is gotta have a plan for what you want to do with it. It's going to be very hard to stick to that plan for anybody, but having a plan for how you're intending to use the money is one of the more effective tools to ensure that outcome. Life will happen, it will disrupt all of your best plans, but having that plan is important. We spend a bunch of time in the period between when a person files their return and they get their refund, trying to set the basics of that plan, using all of the tips and tricks, simple pre-commitment devices, allocating portions of refunds to savings. Did an experiment the last couple of years to our banking customers. It's about 600,000 people, and the ratio of their refund that will contribute to savings, we suggested them 15%. They tune it up, 35 to 40%, average, set aside as an indication of trying to make some sort of plan for what I'm going to do with this money. Keep it separate in a goal. Here's letter concept. That's what a lot of our customers do too. Just park it off in a different pocket in my account so I make sure I use that money in the way that I intended to. Because it can be a way to catch up, or it can be a way to replenish, or it can be a way to build something too.
I think I would agree with what you all have said. I think what we see is that a lot of our taxpayers use their refunds to meet immediate needs. There's a rent that's due, there's a medical bill that's due, there's typically an urgent need for use of those funds that will alleviate a level of stress in some of our older adults with low income their lives. And so what we see is that we have our taxpayers returning because they want that refund because they need it for something specific in mind. And so that is what we provide. I think about this one example that was really heartbreaking. It was a woman, one of our taxpayers, they are worked as a nurse, and one of their patients was an elderly woman who was not able to get the health care that she needed because she couldn't file her return to verify her income. Her health care was being refused because of that. And so the nurse, who was a client, came back to us, helped us get this old woman's tax return filed. And once that was done, she was able to then receive the health care that she needed. And so just recognizing and acknowledging the importance of having to file and having to validate income and understanding what the challenges are for some particularly older adults with low income, I think is important. And so you see more of an urgent behavior and activity from those folks, and those are the people that we serve.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Would like to open it up to any questions from our audience.
I have 2 questions. The first question, thank you for this. This is actually very insightful for me and very helpful to me. So I not only handle my taxes, but I also handle my mom's. So a question for Chime, H&R Block, and AARP, for the people who are doing the preparation, do you stand by the return? So if it's audited, does that person or your company or entity stand by it? And then the second one was just kind of how to think about whether or not you should do a itemized deduction or a standard deduction, because the itemized does take a lot of time. And so even this year, I'm just wondering whether or not I should bother going through that exercise with her. Anyways.
So I'll say for us, yes, we have a promise around that.
Okay.
So if it was a mistake on our end or you didn't get your max refund back, we do have a promise for that part. So we built that in.
ARB Foundation Taxing as well. We are partnered with, we receive grants from the IRS, both VITA, which is Volunteer Income Tax Assistance for low-income taxpayers, and TCE, Tax Counseling for their elderlies, which is focused on older adults age 65 and older. And so in that partnership with the IRS, they are very focused on reviewing and providing quality control over the work that we do, that our tax counselors do. But we have the same promise.
Since you want to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that if you have a return that, I mentioned the low-income taxpayer clinic, so this goes to my theme of the day after. If a return is being looked at and being audited, certain preparers that are uncredentialed can represent you on the audit, but they can't represent you on appeals, and they can't represent you on collection matters, and they can't represent you in court. And so Congress in 1998 authorized a funding program, a grant program, similar to the VITA grant, a TCE grant program, for low-income taxpayer clinics around the country, where attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents, people licensed who've taken a very difficult exam before the IRS, to practice before the IRS, can represent low-income taxpayers for free. And so there were about 125 of them around the country, and we've tried to get them in every single state. But that's the other thing, and there's a website on the IRS that if you look up low-income taxpayer clinic, you can see where there's one in the state. So you should, as constituent service people, you should have that at least that link, you know, that you can then refer your voters, your constituents to, so that they can get the help that they need if the IRS is looking at them.
Thank you.
I love that answer, because on one hand, I wanted to just say yes, but it's also just a lot more complicated by that, because really depends on, of course, just the amount of return, but it depends on the dimension of sort of what the taxpayer is going through. You have to have a different set of credentials in order to be able to represent in different venues. I think the itemization question is a fascinating conversation in the current tax code. It is not always clear. And you have to go through such an intricate process to actually try to figure it out. The various tax software that people use to do this, whether DIY, do it yourself or assisted, like tries to make some estimations best it can. They're getting a lot smarter in terms of saying, don't worry, go through that because we're pretty confident that you're going to get there. So there's more recommendations coming into the process, but right now, a lot more people shifting to just a standard deduction.
Hi, I'm just here with the Tuesday Fund. I have a question. So there's a lot of discussion about the child tax credit, and should it change? Should things change with that in the next year? What can be done to steer consumers away from tax preparers who are creditors, who would probably tell them, well, hey, I can help you, get more money on your next refund if you come with me? Like, are there any campaigns that your organizations are thinking about to just educate the consumer or to, again, steer them away from those types of creditors?
So, I'll sort of, I've been an advocate for creating some kind of credentialing, testing, continuing education for people who are not attorneys, CPAs, and enrolled agents, so that they have something at stake in the game that they will lose if they don't keep up competency. And it doesn't need to be, a complicated thing. It's testing basic concept, competency, but it also gives the IRS or some agency a hook for disciplining them, yanking that. And it also lets taxpayers know there's a credential that I should go to as opposed to someone who doesn't have a credential. But I also fundamentally believe in a comprehensive education campaign along the lines that we were trying to decide to just plant in the taxpayer's mind that there are things they need to watch out for. So if they go to someone who's saying, again, oh, well, the kid's not living with, you can claim this child, or, whatever, that they are on the hook, the taxpayer's on the hook for that. And so that's the sort of thing that we don't do a good job about, that I really think trusting the taxpayer, educating them to be a smart tax consumer, and then trusting them, giving them some armor to buttress themselves from all the things that come in.
Of course, I would have to say, direct them to AARP
And
Foundation.
or TCE, or direct file,
Final
or
plug.
chime.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a big thank you to our panelists today.